Here's my belt, I'll burn, and everything's standing in my way.
Hey guys, Julian here from Overdressed to Impress, doing my DBT09 deck profile for Diabolos, Viamance, Bruce. So we'll jump straight in. We run the grade 0, pretty straightforward. Diabolos Innocent Mat, doesn't do a whole lot, standard grade 0. Grade 1 is Steve, so again, standard Diabolos units. I had considered running Mazer Gear Dragon from Chronojet for the extra draw you can get from it, but fundamentally it doesn't make a huge difference. And eventually, Steve is actually a pretty good card that you will want to call later from Jamil. So being a Diabolos card in a tribal deck, yeah, it's pretty good. So we're happy with the grade 1. And the grade 2 we run is Richard, so again pretty standard. You get to put the Steve back into your soul from the turn before and draw a card. I have actually come across an instance where I've called Richard from my soul because he's obviously a 15k beat at turn 3 onwards. So he's not a terrible unit to run, to be honest. Just having Steve and Richard in your soul to call later if necessary is pretty cool. So yeah, standard ride line for Bruce, nothing's changed there. And then of course we ride into Viamance Bruce, which is the brand new Vanguard for DBT09. He's pretty good. If you go first, you final rush on turn 3, which is obviously really good, much faster, much better than it used to be. And if you ride into Bruce and you've gone second and your opponent is already grade 3, then you can basically go final burst instead, and you get to counterblast 1, restand a column, and that column in total gains 10k. 5k each. So on the surface it may look like a slight downgrade from the old Bruce, but it's a much faster Bruce than before, with a much simpler cost of counter blasting 1 instead of soul blasting 5. So that's the ride line, pretty straightforward, pretty standard, nothing out of the ordinary there. We run an extra 3 copies, of course, for the Persona ride. It's pretty huge seeing Persona Ride and Bruce. You want to be seeing that to get the draw, to get the extra power. You can still have reasonable turns if you don't, but you're kind of relying on trigger sacking if you don't see the triggers that you want. We also run the Gratias Gradal. Again, Persona Rides are super important. You want to be making sure that you get the extra draw power and the extra power to your front row as often as you can. So yeah, run 3 copies of Persona, 1 copy of Gratias. You should be Persona riding nearly every turn, unless you are very unlucky. For the final grade 3 lineups, we run 3 copies of Greg. So he has to be on the front row. When you final burst, you can soul blast 2, counter charge 1, and this unit gets 5k into the end of turn. So really good because he's an 18k beta, which is quite nice. The counter charge is super important. The Soul Blast 2 is slightly expensive, but it's not too bad overall. So yeah, I think 4 is too much, but 3 is absolutely fine. Moving on to the grade 2 lineup now, we run 4 copies of Jamil. Jamil is a decent card. He's not your main attacker of the deck. If you are in final burst, this unit gets 10k power and 5k shield, so he's nice 10k intercept, all from hand, and he's going to be hitting at minimum for 20k, which is really nice. His second effect is when this unit is placed on rearguard circle, if your Vanguard is Diabolos, Viamance, Bruce, counter blast 1, soul charge 1, choose up to 1 of your grade 3 or less rearguards from your soul and call it to an open R. So it's pretty good because you get to call cards that you might soul blast. You can call Steve if you are low on soul, which is really nice. Or you could call something that you may have accidentally soul charged early on in the game that you want out on the board. So it's a pretty good card. It's pretty good. You could definitely run 3 of this instead of 4. But personally, I think Bruce doesn't have a huge amount of draw power, so having the extra shield value in hand is pretty good. But he's not a bad unit. The only problem is he's slightly slow because he doesn't get the power unless he's in final burst. So yeah. Next up, we run our main beat stick of the deck, which is Diabolos Boys Eden. So everyone knows what Eden does, so I won't go into too much detail. He's just there because he's your main target to restand from Viamance Bruce's skill. He gains a crit, he's going to swing for a lot, he can counterblast and retire. He's your main attacker of the deck. He's the one that applies all of the pressure, and he's the one that your opponent is going to try and perfect guard or guard out of every single time. So yeah, Eden, at the moment, I think Eden is an absolute must. If the deck gets a bit more draw power, you could probably go for more of a control build. But right now, I think this deck is all about aggression and pressure, which Eden does perfectly. So the last of the grade 2s that we run are 2 Leonards. So you don't get the full effect of running both Leonards. You don't get to call anything out of your soul. But from turn 3, he's going to gain 5k, and he's going to be attacking columns, and he's still going to soul charge on hit, which isn't huge because the deck doesn't use a whole lot of soul blast, but it's really good because if you end up soul charging something that you don't want off of Leonard, you can always use Jamil next turn to call that card out. So it's not a huge deal if you soul charge one too many cards. But again, more of a control. If your opponent's got an aggro against you early game, you can play Leonard, swing him out. If he's got something like Stephanie behind him, you're going to be swinging for at least, what, 15, that's going to be at least 28k to an opponent's column. That's going to either destroy their hand or destroy their board. So yeah, Leonard I run as a cheeky tool, and that seems to work very well for me. So yeah, that's my grade 2 lineup done. So moving on to grade 1s now, we run 4 Stephanies. So Stephanie is a super good card. She reads, if you are in final rush, all of your other units in the same column as this unit get 5,000. So she basically gives 5k to your front row, to the unit in front of it. And because final rush with Bruce now lasts until the end of your opponent's next turn, if you have a card like Leonard out, Leonard will permanently gain 10k total until the end of their turn, unless of course they retire Stephanie first. So she's a really good card because she just makes all of your attackers hit for that much more and gives them that much more defense on your opponent's turn. So that's why we run 4 of her. Super important. She's your main back row rear guard that you run. We run 3 Mabels. Mabel, again, super important. You counterblast 1 when you attack with Bruce, and gets triple drive. So triple drive, obviously super good. You want to be seeing extra cards in hand from a deck that doesn't otherwise draw really any cards whatsoever except off of triggers. Only issue with it being triple drive you want to watch out for is that you can use the blitz order to simply negate the attack, but it is what it is really. The cards in hand are still worth it. Plus she then makes Bruce 20k or 30k. So yeah, Mabel super important. You want to make sure you're seeing her. If you don't see Mabel, you can put cards like Stephanie behind Bruce, because that will make your Vanguard an 18k on your opponent's turn. So again, super good. You'd always want to put Mabel, I think, unless you don't have the counterblast. But if you don't, for whatever reason, you can put Stephanie down, and that works just as well. And lastly, for the grade 1s that are Diabolos, we are running 2 Trish from DBT09. She's okay. If you're on final rush, this unit gets 5,000 power and 5,000 shield. So she's a 10k shield, again with Jamil, just helps give you extra cards, extra shield value from a deck that doesn't have a whole lot of hand. And she's a 13k booster, which, like Stephanie, is just pretty nice. Again, Stephanie you'd always want to put instead, but if you just need to fill that column for Bruce's restand, then Trish will do the job, because you never want to just be swinging and restanding Eden. You always want to make sure there's a rear guard behind to get the maximum value of Bruce's skill of giving 5k to each unit that restands. So super important, you always have something behind your restander. Lastly, we are running for the grade 1s 3 perfect guards and 1 blitz order for Chrono Jet, for eventually Messiah, for Dragon Tree. Just good to see. Yeah, plenty of them about, so it's always going to see use. Always a good idea to have one of those in your deck. And lastly, we will go to the trigger lineup. So we run 4 copies of the crits. You don't really need effect triggers in this deck because you don't do a whole lot of soul blasting. Therefore, I don't think you need to do a whole lot of soul charging either. So we just run 4 regular crits. We run 4 of the effect fronts, mainly for the extra shield value. But by the time you swing with your Vanguard and restand a column, you're likely going to have 2 attackers left still. So having a front trigger is pretty handy. The shield value is good. You could go and run 3 or 4 extra crits instead of front triggers and go full aggro. Again, I don't think that's necessary with Eden on board because Eden's already going to be guaranteeing you're hitting for 2 damage on that swing every turn, so crits aren't as important. However, I would say since your opponent is always going to be blocking Eden, more often than not, they let your Bruce swing go through. So it could be good to get a few cheeky crits off of your triple drive, as they may not either be guarding low or not guarding Bruce at all. But yeah, so that's what I run for these. And then I also run 4 heals, which is pretty standard. If I was taking this to an event, I would definitely be running one of the new effect heals to give myself extra shield when my Vanguard's grade is higher than mine. Good for Chronojet, good for Dragon Tree, Messiah, that sort of thing. Lastly, we run 3 draws, which again, you could up to 4 if you wanted, just because the deck doesn't have a whole lot of draw power. So seeing these early game is pretty clutch. It's pretty good to see some heals early game. And lastly, we run the Dark States Overtrigger because whilst it's not as bad as Brantgate's Overtrigger, it's still a very good Overtrigger to see early game. So yeah, that's pretty much it, to be honest. If you have any questions, let me know. But yeah, otherwise, we'll see you next time, guys. Thank you.